Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei Becomes the True Dragon of Rias Gremory Season 1 Part 5. Before we start, please go support marcusbm2005 for writing that awesome fanfic. Now let's begin. Chapter 15. New Life. Underworld, Gremory territory. Colder winds was blowing over the main garden of the Gremory family's garden estate. Fall had come and brought along its orange, yellow and red color scheme. The tall bush walls was no more than branches holding on to the few remaining leaves. They felt naked to look at, as every time a wind blew through them a few more leaves left it, flying off to who knows where. Yet this was a beautiful sight, even for the non-immortal beings who lived in a state, even more so for the dragoness who slept out there. She had post eye on herself so that she would lie with one side of her body fully against the garden, so that she could watch its decade, but also beautiful hibernation. Her other side was turned towards the estate, with her left eye having a perfect view inside a single room. Inside the room was a medical bed, with a bedside table and a few chairs. But on top of the bed, slept a blonde-haired child, his left hand clutching onto something. A woman's hand, as next to him in one of the chairs, sat the owner of this estate, holding his hand carefully. This boy was not a human, but he had the soul of one, along with the memories of one. These were parts of the reasons of why he was in this bed, sleeping so peacefully, or rather in a peaceful coma. His mother, the blue dragoness lying outside, had been waiting for what felt like months. She had felt worried, sad and afraid of who he would be when he awoke from this. Thankfully, thanks to a friend and fellow mother, she had regained her composure and had been able to go through her days with less worry. The woman inside, holding onto his hand, was in a similar state. But couldn't act on those feelings, at least not publicly, as she didn't feel she had the right to. But even so, she could at least do this little thing and hold onto his hand a little longer. It was in these moments where she felt her many titles, and her family name really was a curse, at least for her. The Crimson Rose of the Gremorys, a rose. The most beautiful flower that exists, but one cannot simple touch it without it stinging you back. Princess of Ruin. She ruins almost everything and anyone who comes close to her, but only on the highest of levels, such as a lover. It filled her with despair that these once great source of her pride was now also the source of her cursed private life. What does it help to be a princess without a prince? What does it mean to be a beautiful crimson rose if not even the one you love can touch you? She looked up as she felt a slight pain in her right hand. The little boy, if he could feel her worries or not, had tightened his grip on her hand. It made her smile happily, yet it did little to stop her tears to fall. But at least they weren't tears of self-hate, but of gratitude for this little dragon's helpful little gesture. She left a bit after, as she still had duties to do. Even if she wanted to stay, she had to take care of these things, so that once he wakes up again, he won't have to live with the same pressure that her old lover had to live with. Time skip. I believe he should be waking up today or tomorrow, but it's still not clear if he really will. This is after all just what Kuroka and Kaneko think after their life-angry experiment yesterday, my lady. Asia spoke as she stood in the middle of Ria's office room. Ria sat in her chair, her hands under her chin as she was thinking over this information. To her left stood the raven-haired beauty, Akeno, smiling happily at this. To her right stood the headmaid, Grafia. She held her emotions well, but inside she was hoping to tell Tiamat the news. Rias raised her head, making perfect contact with Asia. Good work, Asia. Please tell Kuroka and Kaneko to come by my office sometime in the future. I'd like to thank them personally for this. Ria said, as even if this was not 100% true, it was still something. And if it was true, then even better. Tiamat and Issei could finally be a family again, and she could finally have. What could she have? She was brought out of her train of thought as Grafia tried to get her attention. Lady Rias, I would like to ask for permission to leave. May I? Grafia asked, her face barely holding back the expression she wanted to make. You may, tell Tiamat I feel happy for her. Ria spoke as her face gained a happy smile, as a way to hide her own small inner problem she had recently gained. Grafia nodded, before bowing and then walking out of the doors and down the hall towards the gardens. Akeno chuckled a bit as the sight of Grafia acting like this was an uncommon one. It always made Akone feel like she was watching a child who lacks the emotional expression to match her energy. Don't laugh too loudly, or else you'll have to take more class and queen duties, Akeno. Rias teased, which seemed to work as Akeno PTSD of her first class came back to her. She had been taught by both Finalina and Grafia, and they had not held back, especially with a few of her more important duties. To say Akeno had been scared for life would be an understatement. Please don't, Rias-sama. Akeno said as she shuddered at the thought of her going back inside that room with those two older women. Good. Thanks again, Asia, you may leave and get back your duties. The same goes for you, Akeno. Ria's voice went from being sweet and nice to smug when addressing her queen. Felt an arrow go through her heart at how Asia was being praised while she was being shot down. I am doing my duties right now. Akeno spoke with a comically weak voice. Rias just giggled a little at her answer. I know. It's just so much fun to tease you Akeno, plus it's revenge for him. The mood in the room changed. Asia had just reached the door but stopped as if she was unable to keep walking. They all carried around these thoughts about him as it had been less than 2 months since they said goodbye for good. It was hard to learn to live without him, then to have the slightest bit of hope only for it to be crushed. Rias, realizing she had made mistake, was about to stand up but was interrupted by Asia as she had turned around. She didn't look sad, nor did she have teary eyes. She looked like she was uncomfortable with Ria's joke but didn't let it affect her as much as it would normally have. "I don't think he would have minded if you tease her," Asia said, then went quiet. Rias and Akeno both looked shocked at her mature reaction. It was though a bit ruined as Asia then bolted out of the room and ran down the halls, searching for an empty room. Rias and Akeno looked at each before both smiling calmingly at how well Asia was dealing with this. Akeno, Zenobia and Kaneko were dealing with it too about the same extent, as in they would sometimes have thoughts like what if and such. But Asia and Rias were dealing with it in two different extremes. Asia with her trying to act normally around people but slightly breaking down whenever someone had said something about him or when she was alone for too long. Rias herself felt that the way she herself was dealing with this was shameful as she too had the what if thoughts, like, what if I just choiced the brown lock, what if I had just brought him back to life? Something which always ended with her drinking herself to sleep and just slight bit of hand holding with Issei while he was sleeping. Well, it seems she is still the one most sad about this. She was after all the second person who depended on him, besides you of course. Akeno chuckled awkwardly. Her sudden comment had though gone unnoticed by Rias, but it had brought her out of her train of thought. She turned her head to look at Akeno as confused expression portrayed her face. "Oh sorry, what did you say Akeno?" Rias asked, her tone sounding apologetic. Akeno, deciding it wasn't worth to repeat herself and it wouldn't help the current mood, decided to say. "It's nothing, just a silly joke Rias." A perfectly friendly smile and a few words that sound like something Akeno would say and Rias shrugged it off as nothing. "If you say so, now let's get back to work, we're still having godly amount of paperwork left." Rias sighed as the sizable mountain of paper next to her hadn't disappeared or just done itself. "Is this how older brother feels?" Gremory main garden. Tiamat was lying down on the plain of slowly dying grass, her scars feeling the cold winds of fall hitting her. She had been looking at the garden as it was slowly dying, turning into a mess of brown, green and orange. It was a beautiful show of colors. She could even make out forms or shapes of people and things in the pills of leaves. She saw weird humanoid shapes, something that reminded her of Drake and Albion, but she was not quite sure why. Maybe it was because it was too scurrilous fighting over a nut. She nor the world would ever know. She also saw a shape that reminded her of Office, as it was an almostly perfectly shaped infinite sign. This little game of hers was quite fun, along with weirdly confusing as she had never thought she could be entertained by something as childish as this, but here she was looking at a weird mix between Trihexa and a cow. "You would never see these kinds of things back home, my red gem." Tiamat spoke as she looked silently into his serum. He was still in a coma, but she could see he had changed his post-ion, making it almost look like he was sleeping. She put one of her massive claws on the window, softly as to not break it or scratch it. "I promise you, when you wake up I'll show so many new things that you, yourself have never seen before. I promise, so wake up soon my red gem." Tiamat spoke again as she kept her gaze on his small body, seeing every movement it made. It made her feel worry and also relief, the curse of a parent. You are always worried and relieved when you see your child sleep. She heard a pair of footsteps coming towards her, which made her turn to see the pair was none other than Kaneko and her queen Neen. They both bowed before her, a gesture Tiamat would normally have done back, but not in her current mood. "Oh Kaneko, what can I do for you?" asked Tiamat, her words and way of saying them friendly, but her tone sounding cold. Kaneko wasn't quite sure how to react to that, but decided to shrug it off for now, to her about what she and her sister had discovered. "I come with good news. Me and my sister have done a ritual of sorts to look inside of Issei and find out when he would probably wake up." Kaneko told Tiamat, whom looked towards her with shock in her eyes. She transformed almost instantly into her human, then running over and grasping onto Kaneko's shoulders with an almost bone-crushing strength. "When will he wake up cat?" she yelled out, making both Kaneko and Neen shocked and a bit scared at her sudden aggression. Tiamat noticed this and let go of Kaneko again, taking a few steps back. "I am sorry. I have just been so worried that he wouldn't wake up again. So when you said that I just got very. You know he." Tiamat apologized to the two girls, whom now have gained a slight fear of all women dragons. "Thank the mass she didn't eat us." Was the same thing they thought. "It's okay and I really should have told you sooner. But anyways, I believe he will wake up either later on today or tomorrow." Kaneko explained, which made Tiamat smile as she had expected it to be a week or month more, but no, it was going to be within the next 48 hours. She then again in scary show of her supreme strength and speed, took Kaneko into bone-crushing hug. So while Tiamat was crying and whispering how thankful she was for the good news, Kaneko was slowly dying from her ribs piercing her lungs. Neen stood to the side, unsure if she should help or just watch for now. Tiamat stopped her deadly hug when another female voice was heard, coming from the door to the garden. "Leave the poor girl alone, she is going to die before she gets to see your son again at this rate," spoke Grafia as she came out with a bottle of wine in her hand. Tiamat walked over to Grafia, her smile still vibrant as well as her tears of happiness. Grafia smiled back at her with a just as warm and comforting smile. "I see you have heard the news," Grafia said, earning a nod from Tiamat as she walked over to the table and chairs that Grafia had placed out here for their nightly talks. "Yes, these two have just informed me. They have my deepest gratitude. And maybe even my blessing," Tiamat spoke, before whispering so low that only a dragon or Nikomate could hear it. It seemed to have loud enough for the two present Nikomates to blush, one because of her embrassment and the other for her friend's luck. "It would seem you have a rather promising daughter-in-law over there, but let's not tease her too much, or else Lady Gremory might get too jealous. Besides, let's wait until Issei wakes up." Grafia spoke up, as she could also hear what had been said, or had guessed it by the way Tiamat and Kaneko were acting. "Fine, I'll stop for today, but can you blame me for feeling this happiness and relief that I am currently? I feel as if a heavy burden has been." Tiamat stopped herself as a part of her that she had hoped disappeared came back to surface, to leave, but one thought in her head. "Will he be your Issei or theirs?" it said, until it vanished into its deep and chaotic abyss again. Tiamat just stood still, as she could feel herself starting to shake at the mere thought of losing her son, maybe not in body, but in mind. Grafia noticed this, along with the two other younger women. All of them were unsure of what to do, as the sudden change of the mood had put them all off. They felt a slightly fearful feeling coming off Tiamat as small wave-like rainbows of colors and power began to form around her. It was her aura, but instead of being a chaotic mess like it was supposed to be, it was instead a controlled and worried mess. Grafia had learned, through her many talks and nights with Tiamat, that this meant she was in a mentally difficult place right now. She tried to speak, but was beat to it by Tiamat herself. "Grafia, can we take a walk through the gardens? I need to be away from people right now." Tiamat spoke, then before Grafia could even give her response, Tiamat began to walk towards the hurt archway leading into the grand garden. Grafia just stood there for a bit, looking to the two other younger women, whom shared confused looks. She nodded to them in a reassuring way, before going after Tiamat, not saying anything, just following until spoken to. They kept walking like this, passing by the many flowers beds with no flowers, but instead hardened dirt and withered plants. Grafia kept a close eye on Tiamat, as her aura was still on display. It was not getting worse, but it wasn't becoming better either. Tiamat walked a bit more ahead, before stopping in front of a rather special place in the garden. It was a small grow bed, with nicely smooth stones around it, and it held a nicely grown cherry tree. Though its leaves had fallen ages ago, it was still nice to look at. But the more important thing about this growth bed was the sign that had been put on it. It held 3 names, as well a little message at the bottom of it. Tiamat went down on one knee to look at it more closely. Grafia would have stopped her, but at the current moment she didn't dare to anger Tiamat and didn't want to make her friend more upset. Tiamat just kept staring at it until she looked at the tree again. Watching it closely, noticing its oddly unnatural body, as it had 2 main arms grow out on each side, with a strong trunk to hold it all up. "Grafia, what is this place?" Tiamat asked slowly, making Grafia nervous to answer. This was a rather sensitive place for most of devils in service to the Gremories. Grafia walked up next to Tiamat, who didn't look over at her, as her gaze was still on the tree. "It's a grave. A grave for Miss and Mr. Haidu. As well as the inhabitants of Cowtown," Grafia said weakly, looking away from the tree, as did not want to even catch a small glimpse of the sign. "Why is it here? What does this have to do with the Gremories?" asked Tiamat in a confused tone. Grafia didn't answer, just clutching her hands tightly, almost tightly enough to make them bleed. She didn't want to talk about that horrible day, as it brought too many bad memories back. But it seems that the karma part of Tiamat's name wasn't just a title, but also another use of that age-old saying. "Karma's a bitch." Here lies Goru and Miki Haidu, the parents of the Red Dragon Emperor, Issei Haidu. "The town of Kao lies here as a constant reminder of our mistake." Tiamat read out loud, making Grafia hold back a single tear. Tiamat's aura spiked a bit, making many of the nearby leaves fly off into the sky. She then turned her head slowly towards Grafia, who looked away, as she did not dare face her gaze. "What did Rias and you people do?" Tiamat asked with a slightly angry voice, as her aura began to gain its chaotic colorful scheme. Tiamat started to stand up slowly, letting her aura drown the nearby area, as well as make those not strong enough feel like they were drowning. Luckily no one was in the gardens, it was only the Dragoness and the Ice Queen. Grafia still felt the sense of drowning, but not as strongly as others who would be weaker than her would have. She only felt the need to breathe more rapidly as she felt a lack of air entering her lungs. Grafia could take it, as shown by her almost perfect counter to Tiamat's drowning aura. She pushed out her own, as a counter. It was not strong enough to battle Tiamat's for dominance, but strong enough to let her breathe normally and feel less threatened, as most auras of dragons usually make the people near them feel. Grafia could feel her breathing becoming more stable, allowing her to think clearly about how she should approach the situation, and more importantly make Tiamat calm down again. She knew she had really only one choice, which was to tell her what happened, but she felt it could end with Tiamat misunderstanding and flying off to kill Rias for something didn't even do. But she didn't really see any other way through this, and so with a deep breath, she began to retell about what were the most terrible nights of her life. Small time skip. To say Tiamat was shocked would be an understatement. No, she was absolutely livid at what she had been told. She knew how terrible the Cows Brigade was and had been, how much worse the real mastermind behind it all was, but she found this to be too far. Risvm and Trihexa had already lost the moment Issei died, after having used all his life energy to kill Trihexa, and also happened to blow up most of the remaining members of the Cows Brigade by chance. But those low greats, those scum of the earth, the real demons. They had made a curse-like being of Issei, similar to the one Loki made way back when he attacked. It had been given a simple goal, which would end up causing more grief and sadness, as the destruction afterwards was not at the level they first believed it would hit. It was much higher. Instead of just killing and destroying his parents and house, it ended up destroying the whole of Cow Town. But it wasn't the curse who did that last bit, no, it was the ones who came to try and rescue Issei's family and the town as a whole. Rias and her peerage had gone ahead with full power and tried their best, even while they were grieving to protect the last living things they could remember him by. But because of that still negative and inner turmoil they were in, they had a hard time fighting, and worst of all was Rias. She at a certain point lost all sense and went on a rampage throughout Cow, destroying and killing anything she came into contact with. The cursed being had been prepared for them and had tricked the Haidu couple into believing that Rias and her group had killed Issei. He had also told them about the supernatural world and how Issei had been a slave to Rias this entire time, a lie made by him to trick them. And it worked. When Rias came to their rescue they rejected her, belittled her, disowned her as their daughter-in-law. When she tried to convince them that he was lying to them, they didn't believe her, but worse yet. He killed them right after they said something that even if it doesn't affect her as much anymore, still left a major hole in already broken heart. Don't you ever call us your family and never speak my son's name again with your filthy whore mouth. In a single second after that, they had both been sliced in two by the curse like Issei. Rias had lost it in that one moment as she and everyone else there with her felt they had lost all that was left of Issei. She unleashed almost as much power as her brother could. In those frightening few minutes, she had laid the entire town of Cow to destruction as everything and everyone had been killed. When she finally stopped, she was found crying and wailing as she hated herself for this destruction she had brought into the world. It almost completely broke her mentally and made her go into hiding for a long time. She only came out of it after she had come to realize that Issei wouldn't want her to sit in her room and just blame herself for infinity. So she should instead use her time and effort to work and make sure this never would happen again. Of course this whole thing was blamed on the Cows Brigade, mostly because no one at the time wanted to or even dared to blame the little sister of Surzich's for anything. As he too was grieving and that made him easy to anger. But Rias, even if she doesn't show it that much, this still affected her in major ways sometimes. As an example was the time when she blew Tiamat away when she found Issei. Tiamat had almost forgotten her former grief as Grafia had told her of her own and most of the Gremory peerage. She felt awful for thinking about them being only interested in getting Issei back because they were selfish and wanted to take her red gem away. When in truth, they mostly wanted to earn his parents' forgiveness, along with his too, and feel redemption after that night. Tiamat looked at Grafia's pained face and reached out with one hand to push her into an apologetic hug. She had for a moment been almost consumed by her inner fear of Issei leaving her, for him to forget about their time together, and for her to lose her only son. She felt selfish thanks to her more mature outlook in life, but at the same time she justified in her self-made fear. She believed that the girls might feel the same way she does. They had in their own selfish desire believed they could get Issei back and he would forgive them. That he would be with them again and live out his new life with them like they always wanted. Both of their selfish desires brought them to this situation where neither side fully knows what will happen or how they will react when Issei wakes up. Will he be hers or theirs? Inside Ria's office room, slowly, almost robotically, Rias placed the last piece of paper on the nearest of the 3 towers of work papers. A heavy and tired sigh left her lips as she felt the relief finally set in and the slowly after worry set in. A worried feeling that Akeno is doing something weird as she has been standing in the corner of the room for a long time now. They hadn't talked much since Asia left a few hours ago, and if they did it was almost only about work-related stuff. But why did they talk about that mostly? Why did they not talk about Issei instead? Simple, they both feel uncomfortable talking about him right now, because if what Asia told them is true, then they have to farce him soon. But they too, like Tiamat, were in a flue of worry and doubt about who will wake up. Will it be their Issei, the one they love and want forgiveness from for their sins? Or will it be the son of Tiamat, the one they had become friends with? For Akeno, she would love to have Issei back, so that she and him could have a life together, so that they could be like she saw them in her visit inside Issei's mind. But she knew that it would be selfish, at least she has begun to feel that it would be. And she had also made a connection with a new Issei, as she would call him sometimes. It wasn't a romantic one, as she felt it would be weird and selfish. Weird because he is 11 years old, and selfish because she would most likely only love him as her Issei. She didn't want that, she wanted to be friends with him, maybe even family by bond, as he had called her and the others, before Rias crashed in, one Isan. She had found it adorable, much like the others, and it made her feel bad about her selfish desire. But she believes, or at least feels that Rias felt differently, as she had possibly developed feelings for him. She didn't want to ask, as she didn't want to have a confrontation on their different views, and how Akeno felt that Rias would only love him as the old Issei, and not as he is now. If he even is the new Issei, when he wakes up again. Rias had walked over to the side of Akeno, while she had been in deep thought about this whole thing. She had been calling out to her, but Akeno had been so focused on this thought train, that she couldn't really hear or feel the world around her. Akeno, ugh, what's going on with you today? You're never this quiet. Is it because of what Asia said? Rias wondered, as she let her thoughts out into the room, but the only ones who heard her, were herself and the many old books. She tried shaking her, but with no success, Akeno was still in her trance. Rias sighed, as she decided to walk over to her window, as she was a bit tired and full of thoughts. She had wanted to talk with Akeno about them, but since she was in her own little world, the setting sun would do. She reached the window, a huge pair of glass doors with a golden handle each, she opened them and stepped outside into the sunlight. Its rays hit her body, making her dark red dress come off, as a lighter red or maybe even thin, as the vague shadows of her legs could be seen underneath the slick. Some parts even showed a bit of skin, as the light was just at the right angle. She found its warmth nice, and sat down on a small balcony chair, and began to simply watch the sunset. A soothing breeze flew by, as her hair flew with it for a bit, only to fall back down onto the side of Ria's back. She enjoyed the view that this place gave her. A perfect view of the sun setting, her great and glorious territory, and the two people standing near the gravestone of Cow. Wait, what? Ria spat out, as she jumped onto the side of the railing, and leaned over the side to gain a better view. She could see the two people's hair color, one had a silvery gray, and the other a pale blue. She knew as she recognized those colors, that the two people were Grafia and Tiamat. She gulped, as slight fear began to set in as she remembered where they were standing. The constant reminder of one of her biggest mistakes, the gravestone and tree of Cowtown and Issei's parents. A quick flashback to that night was sent through her mind, then left as fast it came by. It made her shudder, but then an even worse thought came to her attention. What are they doing there, and how much does Tiamat know? The mere thought of it scared her to no end, as the story behind that tree is not a pretty one, nor one she would like to ever relive. So what does Tiamat think of her, and everyone else now? That was important for Rias to know, as it could greatly affect her chances with Issei. She knew it was already a long shot to have him be a new part of her life, especially when it came to what people would think of it, even more so what Tiamat would think of it. If they became friends, or something like that, it could work, at least she believed that, as it could maybe bring about other things. She knew that these feelings she was feeling weren't pure, as they were definitely messed up. But she couldn't help herself, she had fallen too far for the old Issei, and the new one had, even in those short moments she had known him, shown many of the same traits that led her to love the old one. But now this whole dream of hers might be impossible, as Tiamat would most likely not want Issei to be anywhere near her or her peerage. She could understand why, because who could want her as a daughter-in-law? No one, that's who. And now the one person she wants to be with, or at least wants to try to be with in the future, is likely going to be gated off from her. She felt her arms becoming weak, as she felt herself almost slide off the side of the railing. Luckily she felt someone pull her from behind and got her back onto a chair, where she began to breathe heavily as she was in a bit of shock. She could fly, yes, but it would still shock anyone if you were about to fall off from somewhere high. Rias, are you okay? What happened? Asked the worried voice of Akeno, as she came into view of the still shocked Rias. She reached out to hug, which Akeno accepted gladly, but instead of hearing thanks, she heard sobs. She then felt something wet dripping onto her shoulder. She looked to her side to see Rias slightly trembling as she sobbed into her shoulder. Akeno was rightfully confused, as why would something like that make her cry like this, but before she could ask she was met face to face with Rias. Her face was stained slightly with tears, some still dripping off her face. Tiamat knows. She knows about what we did. Rias spoke softly as she weakly pointed behind her towards the tree where Tiamat and Graphius still stood. The Keno felt herself freeze for a second at the sight as a similar train of thought went through her head, much like Rias had before Keno had caught her. We're screwed. She'll never let me. Or any of us near him again. Rias spoke as her voice sounded defeated, as if she knew how all this was going to play out. The Keno felt her defeat as it almost seemed like the reality that they were facing until she remembered a key element of this whole mess they were now in. She made Rias look back up at her, locking eyes with sad blue toward slightly bright purple. I think. No, I believe it will all depend on what Issei decides. If he wants to be friends or stay with his mother and away from us for life. Akeno said. She tried to sound so sure of herself, but she barely believed this herself. But she had learned from Issei that if you believe something hard enough, then it will come to pass. They stood like that for a few minutes, not minding the slowly vanishing warmth from the slowly disappearing sun, nor the cold wind hitting them. Akeno could feel Rias had calmed down as her quiet sobs had stopped and her tears had stopped falling. She felt happy that she had been able to ease her mind and maybe even herself slightly. Thanks Akeno, you really are a good friend. You're right, it's all up to him, we have accepted his choice no matter what we feel. Rias said her tone was still sad, but it held a thing of maturity. Next day, Issei's room, as he hadn't awakened yesterday, and since Kaneko and Kuroka meant he would wake today, so now everyone who had a hand in this whole thing had gathered. Tiamat and Graphius stood on his left side, with Tiamat sitting in a chair, holding his hand in her own. Graphius stood by her side, even though Surziches was here, but she had decided to be a good friend and comfort her. Rias sat in her semi-office-like corner that was left of Issei bed. She didn't hold his hand, as when she had tried earlier, Akeno had touched her and whispered to her it would be a bad idea at the current moment. It hadn't helped much when she had gotten what she would call a death glare from Tiamat, or at least that's what it looked like to her, understandably so, as she didn't know how they stood with each other currently. Were they friends, or did she hate her and everyone else in her family? The rest of Rias' peerage was there too, all of them behind her with Akeno to her side. Surziches and Team Volley were standing at the front of his bed, with Surziches at the front and Volley next to him. Both had a hopeful glint in their eyes, something Graphius spotted. She found it somewhat amusing that both of them had this almost childlike hope in their eyes. Not that she should say that it was childish, when she too had a similar emotion going through, she was just better at hiding it. It was quiet in the room, only the light snores of Issei could be heard, as everyone almost like a hive mind didn't breath. Or at least it didn't feel like it, as their breaths could barely be heard. Then a slight groan came from Issei. Tiamat, as soon as she heard, grasped his hand tighter, watching him carefully to see if anything else was happening. He began turning slightly, then his snores or rather slowly yarns began to become louder. He raised his left arm slightly, then putting it down for support as he tried to slowly push himself up. Tiamat began to help him as she put her other hand on his back. No one had said anything, almost like it was a dream, and if they said a single word it would all vanish. Tiamat leaned a bit onto the bed, still supporting him to sit up. She still held his hand in grasps as small tears began to form in the corners of her eyes. When he finally sat up semi-straight, he began to open his eyes slightly, closing them shut upon contact with the room lights and even the few sun rays hitting him. But he managed to keep his eyes open long enough, then blink a few times before he began to register the tight feeling on his right hand. He turned towards it, his golden eyes beginning to shine as he made contact with his mother's dark blue, though her tears made them look like a much lighter blue. Mother? Is that you?" he asked, his voice being so weak after many weeks of sleep. Tiamat couldn't hold her tears, and so they trailed down her face. She nodded slowly as she felt so much joy, relief and happiness at the sight of her son begin awake. Yes, my red gem, mother's here." She couldn't contain herself and hugged him with all her love that she could muster, almost crushing the poor hatchling, but that did not stop her as the joy she and he felt outdid the slight pain. The rest of the crowd too shared tears of joy at the reunion of mother and son, as well as the happiness of Issei being awake again. They kept hugging for what felt like an entirety, but Tiamat nor Issei cared about that, as they were so happy to see each being well and safe. The people around them could hear the slight sobs from the two as Issei began to tighten the hug with a little strength he had. Though one person was not crying, she was still. Rias sat there with a happy smile, but it wasn't a real one. She was trying to hide her sadness that she wouldn't get her Issei back, but she also knew this was for the best, even if it hurt to admit. Akeno noticed this and tried to comfort her by putting a hand on her shoulder to hopefully take some of her sadness away. Rias put her left hand on Akeno's hand, an unspoken thanks between the two old friends. "Now all I can do is hope that he will maybe be friends with us. That is all I hope for," Rias thought as she kept looking at the joyful scene before her. The finale, chapter 16. Sunlight's desire. Issei's room. The sounds of sobbing and quiet thanks could be heard from the dragoness and her hatchling as she held him tightly in his bed. They were both in their human forms. Tiamat was a beautiful 30-year-old woman with long dark blue hair, aquatic blue eyes, and a figure that could channel most of the supernatural goddess's beauty. Issei was always quite the charmer, his hair being a spiky golden blonde and his eyes being just as golden. The two had been like this for the last half hour, just embracing each other as the many worries they had began to vanish. The room had been mostly empty, only the mother and hatchling pair, Grafia, Surziches and Rias were left behind. Each of the three devils had their own reasons. Grafia was happy that her new friend had gotten her son back, but she was also worried about what she might do, at least regarding the conversation they had a few days ago. The two siblings though, they too had their own reasons, but they were a bit weird for them to explain. Not just to others, but even to them themselves. Surziches wanted to gain Issei's forgiveness for having failed him and inadvertently making him sacrifice himself for everyone else. He had failed him as a leader and as a brother. But he knew Issei wouldn't want him to do this, as he would always forgive him. Even then this wasn't the Issei he wanted to apologize to, he was only a shadow. No, he wasn't Issei Haidu, he was some else. And Rias, she wanted him. She wanted him to be her Issei again, but this showed that wasn't possible. The Issei in front of her was someone else, but he had so many of the same quality that made her love Issei Haidu and have made her have a crush of sorts for this one too. But she knew, or at least believed, that Tiamat knew of one of her darkest days. A mistake she made in blind rage, sadness and rejection. And because Tiamat knew this, Rias didn't feel she would have or even be given a chance to speak with Issei. A silence began to fill the room as the sobs began to stop. Only the sound of light breathing could be heard in its place, before it too was broken by the sound of movement and the sound of the bed hinges creaked because of the two dragons moving. Tiamat sat down in her chair again, to the side of Issei still holding his hand. Her face was stained by many streaks of dried tears, though it was still beautiful, and even more so because of her radiating smile of pure joy. Issei's face was also stained by tears, but his almost golden smile outshined the stains. The two of them noticed the silence that had retaken the room and the three pairs of eyes focused solely on them. Issei turned his eyes to the first person he saw, other than his mother. A woman he would describe as beautiful, with long silky silver hair standing right behind his mother. He knew he had never met her before, but he knew her name and had memories of her, that wasn't his. He turned his head towards the next person he could sense in the room. It was a tall man with long red hair and a pair of blue eyes that were almost the shade blue as his mother's fire breath. He knew his name as well and knew things about him and had memories with him, even though he knew he barely knew him. The next person he saw was one he knew, it was Rias. She was beautiful, no one could deny that. With her long and silky red hair, beautiful face and almost sky-like blue eyes. He had memories of her too, most of them were not his. But the one that was his held hatred towards her, but at the same time he couldn't hate her as she brought him here, he knew that, or at least he could tell or feel it somehow. Rias tried her best to smile in a friendly way towards him as his eyes landed on her. But she could feel that he wasn't looking at her, not really. He was looking at her and the others through the lens of what he knew from the memories he had gained. What was a kid like Issei supposed to do in this kind of situation? He didn't know most of these people, but yet he knew them like they were family. He hated Rias for attacking his mother and his new friends, but also felt a strange emotion towards he had never felt before. Everything was so different now, he knew that. Ever since he met Kaneko and fought her in her peerage, his life had been going in an unknown direction. One of which he couldn't determine if it was good or bad, he only knew he was confused for every new step, new memory and new person he met. He also knew new things about his mother, that she apparently hated the person he was, or had been in his past life. And he also knew this other part of himself, this person that all of these people had come for, this Issei Haidu. He had never heard of him before, but now he knew his entire life like it was his, yet he didn't want it to be his. He wanted to keep his life, to keep being him, to be Issei. But which Issei is that? The one who was raised by Tiamat and learned to live like a dragon? Or was the pervert who had to grow up too fast and thus lost his life too early? Issei thought. He dug his head into his mother's chest, trying to hide from all these thoughts, all these new things and all this new grief. Trauma. Fear. Rage, anger and hatred. He wanted to do things with Rias, things his mother had told him about when she would tell him bedtime stories. He wanted to rip out the throat of a fallen angel who was in prison somewhere on the lower circles of hell. He wanted to call for Drag, the heavenly dragon. Yet he also wanted to forget all of these things, hide away from all of this. He wanted to forget all of this happened, he wanted to run from all this pain that was hidden below all of these memories. He didn't want to see, know or learn any more of Issei Haidu's life. He wanted him gone and out of his head. He began to breathe quickly as his heart rate began to rise and his body began to heat up. Tiamat began to become worried, fearing he would faint again if she didn't do something. Issei, my dear mother is right here, it's okay Issei, it's okay. Mother's here. She tried to seem calm as she tried to calm him, but it hardly worked as he only began to get hotter and hotter. Mother. He spoke weakly as he was beginning to have trouble breathing. Yes dear, what is it? Say something please, Issei, Tiamat said worried. The others didn't know what to do besides Grafia, who thought to summon some ice magic to cool him down. It seemed to help as he could breathe more normally again. I want to forget all of this. I don't want Issei in my head. I don't want any of you in my head. It hurts mom. It hurts, Issei cried out as tears began to appear in his eyes, only to become steam as his body began to warm up even more. Surziches, Rias and Grafia were hurt by his words, but also knew somewhere that it was never his choice to be granted these things. Tiamat began panicking as Issei only became warmer and warmer. His eyes couldn't be seen as he kept crying, only for his tears to become steam. Grafia kept trying to cool him with ice magic, making it colder and colder, to try and help. Rias and Surziches didn't know what they could or should do, and so they stood by stunned and worried about what was happening to Issei. Issei, it's going to be okay dear. It's going to be okay, Mother's is here. I am here, Issei. Tiamat began crying herself as she held onto Issei tighter, burning herself in the process. It didn't get better as suddenly Issei's golden hair went up in flames. His eyes, even if they were hidden behind his steamy feet tears, now gave off a burning light. Like his eyes held two suns in them. Then his aura also began to fill the room. It was unbearably hot, almost like the sun had been put inside the room. It was only then that Tiamat realized what was happening to her son. He is gaining his principle of power. She spoke, no pride evident as this would normally be a happy occasion. But not this one, as the way he was getting it was the worst way to get it. Either one gets it from many years of training and fighting, the normal way and longest. It's also the hardest and only the most powerful dragons, Aka the dragon kings, heavenly dragons, dragon gods and some evil dragons, have ever achieved this. Then there is the one where you get after experiencing unimaginable pain, have too many negative emotions all at once, or survive a traumatic experience. Tiamat didn't know which one Issei had archived, as the pain one goes through can slightly vary depending on it. Issei, you're going to be okay. Listen to me dear. Tiamat spoke in a soft voice, both to hide sadness over her son having to gain his principle this way, and her worry about him getting it at such a young age. You'll be okay my red gem. I'm right here, my Issei. It will be over soon. I love you. Tiamat spoke again, before tightening her embracing around him. Then out from her back came two large dark blue draconic wings, then she used them to shield her and Issei inside them. The unrelenting heat vanished, only leaving a slightly warmer room, as Tiamat had used both magic and her body to contain the heat from Issei. He was still sobbing as the pain he was going through began to burn him too, showing his power was too much for him. Through a small slit of Tiamat's wings, the other three could see an almost orange golden light shine out, before disappearing along with heat. Tiamat opened her wings again, making a warm wave burst out from her containment that was her wings. Issei's hair was no longer on fire, but his eyes still had that sun-like golden light in them. But something that also shocked the onlookers was the pair of crimson curled horns protruding from both sides of Issei's head. They held small lines of gold in them, but even so they didn't match his overall color scheme. Tiamat had also changed, as her arms, face and the inside of her wings had burned. Issei just looked confused at his mother, no longer feeling the burning pain he felt earlier. Mother? He asked, as his face began to curl into a crying face again, as he could put two and two together and figure out he had burned his mother. It's okay my dear, mother is fine. You were just too powerful for me, my dear red gem. Tiamat tried to soothe him, as she held him soothingly, making him look at her, seeing her relieved smile. She was relieved that he was fine, and happy that he had achieved something as great as this. She was worried too, but right now she doesn't want to think about it. She just wanted to be with her son. She just wanted to see her son be happy again. Issei still cried a few more tears for a bit before falling asleep. He was sleeping like a rock, as his awaken had taken a lot out of him. Tiamat, Rias, Surziches and Grafia left the room and went to another room where everyone else had gathered. They needed to discuss what the next step or what they all should do when Issei was fully awake again. Grafia opened the doors for the other three, letting in Rias and Surziches first, who found a seat each next to their family. Tiamat came in after that, standing in the doorway still for a second as everyone's eyes were on her. She took a quick breath before sitting down on a sofa somewhat apart from the other chairs and sofas. She sat there for a bit, feeling the many stars on her, until she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Grafia who had sat next to her, a supportive smile on her face. Tiamat looked back at the group, noting the many people that had gathered. Obvious ones were the former Lord and Lady Gremory, along with their grandson Milikus, with Surziches and Rias next to them. Rias' peerage sat next to Rias on a mixture of chairs and a single sofa. Kiba, Gaspar, Zenobia, Asia, Kaneko, Akeno and Rias. Bali was also there, with him and his group on the other side of the older devils. Tiamat took in a deep breath before she bowed her head, taking most of the gathered people by surprise. I Tiamat, Chaos Karma Dragon King, offer my deepest thanks. Please ask anything of me, as I owe you people so much for saving my son. Tiamat spoke before raising her head again, but there wasn't a shred of gratitude on her face. She wasn't thankful for what they have done, as it's because of what they have done that her son was put in the state he was in. Is what I would have loved to say, if not for the fact that it was your interference that brought my son into a coma in the first place, Rias Gremory. Tiamat said, her eyes narrowing. The mood in the room changed quickly, as a somewhat joyous moment became a serious one, as Tiamat had just said she didn't find what they had done as helpful. Not anymore at least. But Lady Tiamat, no, listen here. I know I may have started this whole thing, but I never wanted this outcome, nor did I ever want him to be in the kind of state that he is in now. I took a gamble and believed that the connection I felt between my son and Kaneko could make him stronger, but it only made him. Tiamat stopped herself as a few tears escaped her eyes. A.N. So I know Tiamat started this whole thing by having Kaneko enter his mind and unlocking his memories, but since I have changed my story so much and never got to update the older parts, so now my story contradicts itself. So Tiamat didn't want to say, her son, to become Issei Haidu, she wanted him to be cured of Juggernaut drive that began eating at him way back in chapter 8 or 7. Got it. Great. I wanted it to make him more capable, but it led to him becoming sick, almost being consumed by Drake's Juggernaut and then entering some kind of self-made version of it. I never wanted this. So I have made a decision. Tiamat said. She had everyone focus on her, not a single thing would make them look away. They all looked as she stood up, her long hair falling down on the floor. Then her wings sprouted out and spread out, giving her the image of a draconic angel. When my son wakes up, I will take him home and I will never let you people near him again. She spoke as she slowly began to float off the ground, her aura beginning to leak, forming magical flames around her. She wasn't trying to threaten them, she wanted to get her point across that she didn't want her son to have anything to do with them ever again. Rias stood up slowly, her head held low. Tiamat stared at her face holding a stoic expression as she pierced her with her chromatic eyes. Rias came closer, no one stopping her as mostly no one wanted to stand between her and the anger of mother, a dragon mother. What do you want to say, Rias? That you're sorry, that you want to make it up to me and my son? Tiamat asked. Her aura reacting for every spoken, making the flames grow, then die down again for whenever she spoke. Yes. I wanted to say those things. But I also wanted to ask you something. Rias said, her head was still hung low as she felt she had no right to look at Tiamat. She knew that Tiamat knew of her wrongdoings, and she knew Tiamat was doing mostly because of her actions. What is it then, Gremory? Tiamat asked, her voice having become stoic as well, to hide her emotions. She wasn't really angry, at least not as much as she was showing. She was afraid. She was scared as only a mother could be. I wanted to know. To know if you're doing this because oh yes. I know what you did and it is part of the reason. Tiamat cut her off while also finishing her question. Rias clenched her fist in anger that one of, if not her biggest mistake, was going to be what stopped her from being with someone again. I see. I guess then you have more than enough reason to take Issei away from here. Rias was stopped as the sound of doors opening stopped her. Everyone looked towards the door, seeing 3 people in the door frame. One was a tall red-haired tan man with what seemed like a nose ring of golden horn. Another was a young girl with a black skirt and shirt on and long black hair and emotionless eyes. And the last one was Issei. The others, besides Tiamat, Grafia, Rias and Surziches, hadn't seen his physique. His curly crimson and golden horns, his hair that looked like a flame at least in this light, and his 2 sun golden eyes. He wore only a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. He was quite cute, but this was not the time. Tiamat saw her son out of bed and flew right over to him wanting to lift him into her arms, but she was stopped by Great Red, the red-haired tan man. Let me go, she yelled at him, not caring who he was or how he was, as she only wanted to take her son and get away from this place. No, not until you all hear what Issei has to say, as he is the person that you, Tiamat, are trying to control the future of. Great Red said, his voice not giving a hint or chance at fighting back. Tiamat backed down, understanding his threat. Great Red still had a hand on her, not trusting her completely to not try something. Tiamat sighed before turning to Issei. She noticed his eyes had become more calm than before. They were still in flames, but they had become more peaceful in a way. What do you wish to say, dear? Tiamat was trying to sound as loving as she could, but she was beginning to feel her tears creeping forward. At least none of the others, besides her son and the dragon gods, could see that. Issei stepped a bit forward, standing a bit ahead of the 2 gods. He felt uncomfortable under so many gazes, but knew he had to say this, he had to or else he would come to regret it. Earlier, Issei's room. Issei had awoken from his slumber, it being more of a quick nap than anything else. He opened his eyes, hoping to see his mother, but instead found two other people. Office and Great Red, the dragon gods. He blushed a bit, feeling unworthy of their attention, and even more that they seemed to care enough about him for them to visit. The two gods got confused by his reaction, both looking at each other, shrugging their shoulders, as neither of them understood what he was doing. Hey Office. What is this kid deal? I know he has been in a coma for some time now, but isn't it a bit weird for him to suddenly blush at the mere sight of us? Great Red asked, as he took a peek over his shoulder, seeing Issei just carefully and silently watching them. It is a bit weird, and even more weird is the fact that you think he would blush at the sight of you. He must have seen me just now and realized I am the most beautiful dragon he has ever seen. Office declared, her stoic voice and face not matching her teasing voices. Like anyone would ever fall in love with you, you overused the lowly trope. Just use your older form already, people are starting to get the wrong idea, Great Red whispered shouted at the small goddess, who just looked confused at him, before looking down and noticing she was floating to him to have perfect eye contact. You have a point, Baka Red. Office said, and before Great Red could comment on her insult, she turned to Issei who was still sitting and waiting patiently. Boy. No Issei, I am Office the Ouroboros dragon god of infinity. This here is Great Red, the true dragon god emperor. We have come here to give you a gift from Issei. He left it to you, before you and him succumbed to your forgotten dragon juggernaut drive. Office said. Issei just became confused as he didn't remember leaving himself a gift, then he remembered that the other part of him, or rather the owner of all of his new memories, his name was also Issei. What did you leave me? Issei asked. Office and Great Red looked at each other, before looking back at Issei and stringing their left and right arm towards him. He gave you hope love. Great Red and Office said, each of them having a different name for his gift. Issei looked at them confused, before he noticed a green gem form itself above the hands of Office and Great Red. He looked at it with interest, he was a dragon and a young one at that, so new things were interesting, and even more so were things that could be seen as treasures. The gem began to shine, before it began to glow outward, making the room they were in have a sort of north light dancing around. It was only in different shades of green. Issei had stars in his eyes at this new sight, becoming mesmerized by it and looking all around trying to remember every detail of it, as if he didn't he would forget it all. It's beautiful. Is this hope? Or is this love? He asked out loud, the two gods not answering as they barely knew either. Then the light began to change as it became even more vibrant. New and totally unknown shades of green began to spring forward, something the two gods semi-lost their shit over, but only on the inside, so as to not scare the young hatchling. What is it you desire, Issei? An unknown voice spoke, making all three of the dragons look around, trying to find the source. The voice began to laugh a bit at their struggles, which also led them to find it, it was the gem. Who are you? Issei asked as slowly turned over and began to crawl slowly towards the gem on all fours, as he was still not used to having only two legs. I am Desire. Rather I am your unknown desire. Desire said its voice revealed no gender, as its voice seamlessly changed gender for every word it spoke. The two gods decided to stay out of this, as they kind of guessed that this was Issei Haidu's real gift. My unknown desire? Issei asked as he sat down on the end of his bed. But I am a desire you still don't know or have realized you have. Hence why these two behind couldn't say my true name, as desire is the reason behind most feelings. Desire explained to Issei who nodded, not fully understanding what it was saying, but he was getting the gist of it. I have been asked by a boy who was almost purely driven by desire to give you a helping hand with your own desire. It said, making Issei confused until he remembered that Issei Haidu was a huge pervert and very open about it. I see. But what is it that I desire then? I don't think I desire anything, well. Issei stopped himself as his former words came back to him. He did have a desire to be rid of these memories and just be himself again. You do have one, everyone has one. It doesn't have to be lewd, evil or comical, it just has to be a desire to obtain something. Desire said as it tried to make Issei realize his desire. But what desires did he have, other than his desire to forget all that has happened to him and lose these new memories? You desire love as well as hope, Issei. I can see it in your eyes. Issei looked up at the gem, stunned that it knew something so deeply borrowed in him. How did you know that? Issei asked, his voice shaking a bit. I am desire silly, I know desire when I see it. And also what kind of desire. For example you desire love, but it's not romantical, at least not yet, but you will have to take care of that one alone. No, yours is one of familiar love. You want you and your mother to have a perfect life. Desire to explain, making Issei nod as if it was true. He wanted him and his mother to have a perfect life together, where he would protect his mother and she could live a peaceful life. A childish desire to show love, but a noble one. You also desire that you could become friends with Issei Haidu old friends. A small ember of hope inside of you wishes for this, even though they hurt you, you still wish to be friends with them. Desire said, making Issei hang his head as he knew it was true. He did want to be friends with them, as they had been his friends ever. He didn't want to lose them and return to a solitary life with his mother. He wanted to have friends, to have lifelong comrades. To have his own family that wasn't just him and his mother. But he also hated them, because as Desire had said, they had hurt him. They had only been friendly towards him because in their eyes he was the thing keeping them from getting to Issei Haidu. But the golden-haired girl was different. She wanted to be his friend, truly, and she didn't want Issei Haidu back to life, saying he deceived his rest. I can feel you have realized that you have this desire. Good, now all you have to do is accept them, both these two desires and also all those people as who they are. Make them your friends, make them your family and keep them safe. For your own desire's sake. Desire spoke. Issei lifted his head to see the gem, beginning to dim slowly and taking away its north light. What am I supposed to do? Please tell me I can't do something like this after all I have done to them. Issei cried out, but it was already too late. The gem and Desire had both vanished, leaving only Issei, Office and Great Red. He hung his low again, believing he had failed before he even tried. If it's just pain, I'll endure it. Office said as she looked at Issei with a small smile. Issei looked up, not understanding what she had said. What are you saying? Issei asked, but before he could get an answer, Great Red said something as well. I am fine with being stupid. Great Red said, blushing a bit as the comment was a bit embarrassing. Issei just got more confused, leading to Office's float closer towards him. These are words Issei has once said when he too was faced with a hard choice or challenge. Learn from them, they hold a certain wisdom to them. Office said simply, before floating backwards again. Issei just looked at her, even more confused. He then began to think about those words, trying to find this wisdom they spoke about. Be fine with being an idiot. Pain is meaningless. What does this even mean? Issei thought before something clicked in his head. Does it simply mean to live as you want? To not care about the obstacles in your way and not having to always be right? Is that what it means? Issei thought. He liked it, it was so simple anyone could understand it after a bit of thinking, but even so it was deep. He felt he knew Issei Haidu a bit better, he wasn't just a perverted idiot. He was a young idiot who was open about his desires, not caring that it hurt him. He was an idiot, but not seeing it as his biggest fault. He embarrassed his bad traits and became better because of them. So what did these words mean to Issei? To do something, even if he knew if he was going to win or not, if he was going to fail or not. To take everything head on and find out the hard way who he was. His eyes, hair and horns began to shine somewhat, making the two gods feel that he had understood what they had said to him. You ready, kid? Great Red asked Issei, who looked up at him with determined eyes. Yes, I am ready to follow my desire. Issei said as for a second his hair and eyes went up in flames. Present time, living room. Issei stood in front of the large group with the two dragon gods and his mother who was being held back by Great Red behind him. He looked scared, nervous, but he also held a fire of determination in his eyes. He closed his eyes, breathing to calm himself. He opened his eyes again, this time though they were on fire as two suns had been relit inside them. Golden sunlight shined from them, it stunk a bit to the many devils, but they chose to not comment on it. I want to say something. Something important. To everyone here. Issei started, his voice shaking a bit as he still felt nervous under the gaze of the people in front of him. He took another deep breath before he continued. I would like to be friends with you. You all. Issei said, blushing as he had not realized how embarrassed he was going when planning to say this. Though his words were few, it still left an impact on the woman mostly, as who wouldn't find a small young boy's request of friendship to be cute. Especially when he blushed like that, but they had to hold themselves back from saying yes, even though all of them, well maybe except Volley and his crew, wanted to be friends with him. Not because he was a reincarnate of Issei Haidu, but because they felt that he could fill the space Issei had left and make it his own. But two things stood in between this friendship and those things were Tiamat and Rias. Tiamat, as she had said earlier, she didn't want Issei to have anything to do with them anymore or ever again, as some of them had hurt him in the pursuit of their own selfish desire. And Rias because she had been in an unclear state of mind and had attacked Tiamat and had tried to take Issei for herself. Issei definitely felt some small embers of anger towards her, but he wanted to try and put it behind him. He was rather mature for how young he was, but he was still a child and it showed in how he chose to do things sometimes. Issei, what are you saying dear? They hurt you can't be serious dear. Let's go home and forget all about this, okay dear. Tiamat tried to make Issei choose her side and leave with her. She didn't dislike any of them, at least not most of them, but she wanted Issei to be safe. And she didn't see them as being safe. Issei turned to his mother, who began to smile thinking he was going to listen to her, but that smile vanished when he opened his mouth. No mother. I don't want to forget this. I want to be friends with them, maybe even become a A family with one of them. Issei spoke, though the last bit was more mumble, so only those with enhanced hearing heard him. So suddenly Tiamat had a stunned face, while Kuruko and Kaneko had a blushing face at his cute words. Volley was indifferent, but he could definitely understand what Asia had been talking about, that he acted a bit like Issei Haidu. Tiamat just kept stare at Issei in disbelief that he would want something like this, at such a young age, and with women much older than him. Rias stood still, watching the scene and becoming confused as she saw Kaneko and her sister blushing, and Tiamat looking stunned. What did he say? She wondered, only to have her question asked by Asia, who was curious as to why Kaneko was blushing. He said he wanted to have a family with one of us. Maybe. Kaneko whispered, but loud enough for the Rias peerage and family could hear, along with all the dragons and Kuroko. Tiamat began to regain her composure, only to lose it again when she heard Kaneko say it again. She just became stunned again, then a feeling of fear crept into her mind, that he would leave her for them, or that they would put him in a similar position that Haidu had gained in their ranks. As the spearhead. You can't do that, you can't marry any of them, Tiamat roared out, making Issei both sad and embarrassed, as he didn't really want to say the last bit, but he felt that he should follow his desire, and so he said it. A few tears began to build up in his eyes, as he looked like a mother, his face scowling together as tried his best not to cry. Why not, mother? I just want friends and a bigger family. I don't want to be alone one day. When you fly away. Issei said as his tears began to roll down his face, but so too did some of Tiamat as she understood his words. She had told him those words a long time ago, when he had asked what happens when a dragon dies. Instead of telling the real truth, she gave him a kid-friendly version. Flashback, 5 years, familiar forest. Inside Tiamat cave, when Issei was only able to communicate through a mental connection with his mother, he had asked a question. A question everyone has asked at one point in one's life. Mother. What happens when we die? Issei asked, as he crept over the open cave room, from his and his mother's shared sleeping spot. Tiamat turned her long neck towards him, as she had been previously occupied with something less important. Why do you ask, my red gem? Is living your life not good enough for you? She asked, her tone having a sense of humor to it, even if the joke she tried to make went over Issei's little head. No, mother, I just wanted to know what happens when dragons die. Issei asked, his voice holding a bit of sadness to it, something Tiamat couldn't stand to hear, and so she moved over to his side and held him in wings. Oh my dear, you won't have to worry about it, not for a long time. And besides, when a dragon dies, we fly away to a far-off land where we live in paradise, and our every wish is fulfilled. Tiamat spoke as she used a bit of her aura to form a kind of scenario around her and her son, to try and make an image of this paradise. Really, mother? So when I come there, you and I can be together in this paradise? Issei asked in somewhat glee, not knowing his mother's sweet and protective lie. Of course, my child, so when I fly away one day, far into the future, don't cry because we shall see each other again. Now let's go to sleep or else you won't be strong enough to fly there when it's time. Tiamat spoke, before scolding Issei for being up past his bedtime. The two dragons curled up together, Tiamat surrounding him and holding him in the middle of a circle she made out of her body. End of flashback. The others didn't understand what Issei's last words meant, but they could see it caused a reaction from Tiamat, as her tears came with no stop. My red gem. I won't fly away yet. Tiamat tried to speak, but her voice couldn't hold it together as she began to break down. Issei only had to say those words for Tiamat to stop struggling. She knew he was right, as despite how much she didn't want to admit it, she was old, really old. One day she would have to fly away and leave him on his own, in a world that he might not know well enough, if she got what she wanted and made him leave with her and never see all of these people again. I want to have a family, even after you fly away, mother. So that I won't have to fly away soon after you. Issei said, his seemingly innocent words and obvious desire to have family even after his mother was gone, made the others understand what the phrase fly away meant to him and Tiamat. Many of them were affected as they understood his words. He was afraid to lose people, and even so then that, he was afraid to lose his mother. So it broke their hearts to hear the small child admit he would die if he didn't have family when his mother passed on. But Tiamat felt it even more, as while Issei had been speaking for the last few minutes, he had never broken his eye contact with her. She couldn't say anything back, she couldn't do anything. If she took him away and then passed on, he would either die or kill himself because he would miss her so much. No one moved a muscle as everyone let his words sink in, and as Tiamat began to sob. She felt she was the worst mother ever, even though it was far from the truth, as Issei loved her more than anything, but it was hard to see such things when one's own child says they die without them in their life. Only 3 sounds could be heard. One was the low and deep breaths of everyone, as watching a small kid talking about death was a bit harder than they had all thought or ever imagined it could be. The other was the low sobs of Tiamat as she berated herself, believing she was the worst mother of all time. The last one was the sound of soft steps, something that made a few people look away for every step it took. It was Rias who was walking slowly over to Issei. No one tried to stop her, nor did anyone know what they should do, as the situation had gone from being a joint discussion of how they were going to handle things when Issei woke up, to now being about Issei wanting to have a family, even after his mother passed away. Rias came closer and closer before she stood next to Issei, who had still not taken his tear-filled eyes off his mother's own. She went down on both knees, sitting next to him. Her arms hang on each side for a bit, but anyone could see she wanted to hug him, to comfort him and make him smile. She took a deep breath before she put her arms around him. He didn't resist at all, if anything he welcomed it as he put his own 2 hands on her right arm, holding it tightly as his tears came out like fountain water. Great Red let go of Tiamat, who just flopped onto her knees, sitting there silently watching her son being comforted by another woman. She only felt worse and worse, until she felt a small nudge from behind her. She saw the hand of her friend, Grafia, on her shoulder. She was smiling with the same supportive smile. She crouched down next to her, moving her head closer and whispered something to her. It's okay to be afraid of change, but right now you don't have to worry about that. All you have to worry about is the fact your son needs his mother. Grafia whispered, letting go of Tiamat. Issei, who was still holding onto Ria's arm and crying, suddenly felt another pair of arms around him, ones he knew all too well. His mother had joined the supportive hug Rias had made, it only led to Issei crying even more. It's my dear red gem. Mother and your new family is here. You won't have to be alone when I fly away, because they will be here for you. Won't you, Rias? Tiamat asked in a low voice, so only really Issei and Rias could hear it. Rias looked shocked that she would ask something like that of her, as she didn't feel she was worthy to be asked such a thing after what she did to the two of them. Issei looked at her, his tear-stained eyes still holding a golden glow to it. Will you, Rias Wani-san? Issei asked, much to both Tiamat and Ria's surprise, as they both thought he disliked her. But it seems he either forgot or had chosen to take a step towards becoming friends and maybe one day family. Of course, I will be there for him. Always. Rias said, before tightening the hug as she felt happy. Happy that Issei and Tiamat seemed to have forgiven her, that she could maybe have someone fill that space in her heart that Issei had left and maybe find someone new to love one day. The rest of the group, except Vali and his team, joined in the group hug, promising as well to look after him when Tiamat would fly away. The 2 dragon gods had left while they all did this, not that any of them really noticed. What really mattered was welcoming these 2 new members of their family. Time skip 100 years, Gremory territory. Inside a large throne room, though not as big as her older brothers, sat Rias Gremory on her crimson throne. Her throne lay on top of a small case of stairs, with each step having a few chairs where one of her peerage's kings in service to her sat on. Each step has a specific value to it. She herself sat on the 9th step, as she was the king and therefore the most valuable. The Kendo came next, then a few steps came both Roswis and Kaneko, then after Gaspar and Asia. Then lastly Zenobia and Kiba. But why were they all gathered here, and why? What could be so important as to have them all gathered in this manner? Well, there are 2 important guests coming. One of them was unknown, but had been very persistent about meeting with Rias. And the other one, who was already there, was none other than Issei, the new heavenly dragon of sunlight. He had been on a few trips to most factions for the last 10 years, as he had to show he was not a threat to any of them, but also that he was the real deal. So now he had returned to his second home, his main home being his burned spot in the familiar forest, as Mother Cave had been destroyed and had been made into a grave for his mother. She had flown away a little over 20 years ago, and as Rias and the others had promised, they held him and were there for him when it happened. The doors opened, covering the area near the rather oversized double door be covered in the shadow of a rather large figure. It was a large crimson dragon, easily 60 or 70 meters long and 30 meters tall. His head had 2 crimson horns, with golden lining in them. His eyes looked like 2 suns, as the glow they gave would remind one of the sun's light. He took a step forward, making most of the hall shake for each step taken. He soon after stood with his entire body inside the grand throne room. He looked towards them, his family by bond. Issei had returned to him, and his draconic ego had not faded with his travels. He likes to appear in his dragon form, saying it helps to make people act more respectful. Rias shook her head at her younger brother-like figure actics, before standing up and bowing, showing respect as he was still a heavenly dragon. Heavenly dragon Issei. She raised her head, gaining eye contact with him. Welcome home. She smiled, as did the others. It's good to be home, Rias. It's good to see you guys again. He said as his body began to glow in a bright golden light as he changed to his human form. When the light vanished, a tall young man stood in its place. Despite being over 100 years old, he looked like he was in his early 20s. One of the perks of being supernatural and a dragon. So, anything interesting happened while I was gone? Issei asked as he opened his arms wide, ready for a group hug, which he got as they all nearly jumped him at the same time. When the hug was broken, as well as a few arms as Issei hugs were no joke, Rias tried to act properly again. Well, besides the birth of your first niece, nothing else. Rias teased, which made Issei's eyes go wide, as he could already feel Grafia would grill him for that. Oh really? Huh, how time flies. What's her name? Issei asked, as he was very curious and also overly happy to have more family to surround himself with. Tia Gremory Lucifuge, she was named after my mother. Nice one, Grafia, gotta thank her for that later. Issei smiled, remembering his mother and hoping Tia would grow up to be like her one day. Well, she doesn't have much in common with Tiamat. She is very rude, gets very lonely easily, and makes a mess of anything she can get near. It reminds me of someone else though. Akeno teased as Issei blushed, remembering his younger self. Yeah. Oh, I heard that you had some important guests coming today, right? Issei asked, his eyes glowing with a certain emotion, one Rias knew all too well. Yes, she is coming today, and no, you can't do that thing. Rias said, making Issei's mouth waver like he was about to cry, only for Rias to turn herself away from him. He went up to her side, this time he tried with puppy eyes. Still no. Rias' answer, but Issei just continues. I said, half an hour later. I can't believe you got me with freaking puppy dog eyes. Rias crumbled as she was being seated on top of Issei's head. Issei had found out, a long time ago, his head had the perfect shape to have a throne on it. So sometimes he would convince Rias to sit on his head. It was a great power move, but it also made her feel embarrassed as she felt like her third horn, as she wore mostly crimson red, so she matched in rather well with his two other horns. It's not so bad, besides it helps to make people be more respectful toward you, as if they don't they will offend someone who has a dragon as a seat. Issei said, not understanding that the only real reason people didn't dare act out of turn when they did this was because they're scared he would eat them. If only you knew the real reason, Issei. If only you knew. Rias thought. Then the oversized double door began to open again. In came a young woman. She had long blue hair and a pair of violet eyes. She wore a long black trench coat with a white button of shirt underneath and a pair of black pants with leather shoes. But something even more interesting she had on was an all too familiar red gauntlet with golden spikes on it and dragon claws like fingers. No way, she is the red dragon Empress Azazel was talking about. Issei whispered to Rias, who just nodded as she had heard the news as well. The woman stopped, only a few feet away from the first steps of the stairs to where Rias' throne would normally be. She stood there for a bit before her face morphed into an overly eager smile at the sight of Issei. Oh wait, sorry, I shouldn't say the Lord's names in your presence, right? Oh. Sorry. My name is Yelena Gladius, this generation Red Dragon Empress and Issei's future wife, she declared, making everyone stunned before a roar-like shout was heard from Issei. My what? Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.